I'm going to be reading a story that is about commitment and devotion and love. And I think those are all wonderful things that we're not seeing that much of in some aspects of life these days, and in others we're seeing a lot of it. So I will begin right now. The story is called The Fox Couple. Many, many years ago, in the dead of winter, Wildlife Rescue was called on to trap and rescue an injured red fox. The beautiful auburn-colored fox had been shot and severely wounded. She fortunately had managed to make her way onto a ranch near Blanco, Texas, with landowners who were sympathetic. They were kind-hearted animal lovers. They had been putting food out for her for about 3 days when they called me. They were hoping her wounds were not serious. They were optimistic that the fox would recover without any further assistance. But as the days passed, they could see she needed more help than they could provide. When I arrived at the wooded property, it was just after daybreak. I was hoping to get a glimpse of the fox so that I would know exactly what I was up against. My wish was almost immediately granted. Out of the dense cedar limped a thin, bloody red fox. I could not imagine how this animal was holding on to life. Apparently, she had been shot more than once. I could see bloody bits of flesh and large patches of exposed, torn muscle and tendons. Surely infection had set in. I knew that this poor, small, once healthy fox must be burning up with a fever. I grabbed my net and a live trap. I hated the thought of putting her through more stress, more fear, and more suffering, but there was no way I could help her if she remained free. As I approached slowly and cautiously, the weary and wounded red fox gave up before my very eyes. She simply could not put up a fight. I gathered the limp animal into a large, soft blanket. As I examined the emaciated body more closely, I realized that I was holding an adult female red fox. I was relieved that it was winter and not spring when I found her, because there could have been babies involved otherwise. When I had been deeply concerned about leaving behind the babies, I knew now I did not have to worry about that, and that was a really good thing. But I was soon to learn that we were leaving behind someone very important. I began to walk away with her when out of that same dense underbrush quietly crept a sleek, healthy male red fox. I knew that this could only be the devoted mate of the dying female. As I walked towards the car, the male fox lurked only yards behind me. I could not leave the female there to die. I had to take her away from him and hope that if she could be saved and returned, he would be waiting for her. As I drove away, I could see him in my rearview mirror. His keen eyes watching my car disappear down the dirt road. Little by little, he slipped away in a cloud of dust left behind, quietly looking on as his mate vanished from sight. The weeks following her capture were surely painful and terrifying for the fox. She was on constant intravenous fluid therapy. Her wounds had to be flushed and cleaned daily. Her fur had dried and fallen out, and much of her body was left naked and raw. She would often slip into a deep sleep, and I would be certain that we would lose her. Her fever would rage out of control, and then her temperature would plummet. She seemed to be drifting in and out of death's doorway. Weeks passed, and the main fragile female refused to give up her fight. Finally, on a clear morning in February, the tenacious fox lifted her head. She slowly rose to a standing position and, trembling, lapped some cool, fresh water from her bowl. By noon the next day, she was able to chew on a few small pieces of raw meat. Finally, she was on her way back to her life as a free red fox. On the first day of spring, a sunny March morning, I decided that the fox who had visited to death and returned to life was ready to be set free. Her beautiful red coat would never be the same. Patches of dark, coarse fur had replaced the soft copper-colored coat. The scars on her upper legs would be with her forever. Still, her spirit had not suffered. This once again vibrant animal was jumping and pacing in her cage, eager to get back to the business of living. It was time to take her home. As I arrived at the ranch, I remembered the day when I had driven down that same dirt road, taking the battered fox far from her home and her mate. I remembered so well the male fox watching my car drive away, watching his life's mate disappear. Months had passed since their separation. The season had changed, and I wondered if he could possibly have waited for her. As I lifted the crate out of the car, the female began to scratch at the door. Nothing else mattered to her now. She had to get out of that crate, away from her life in captivity. I opened the door, expecting a flash of red to come darting out from the carrier, never to be seen again. I was proven wrong. As the fox stepped out of the crate, she took several graceful strides out into the sunshine. She stood still, shook her body from her slick whiskers to the tip of her bushy tail. Every muscle twitched, every strand of fur stood out and caught the gentle movement of the wind. She knew that her life was her own again. I waited for about 3 hours. The red fox took her time as she sniffed the familiar bushes and rolled in the hard black soil. Probably just to humor me, she took a few bites of the fresh meat that I was leaving behind for her, just in case she needed it while readapting to her life. I had given up all hope of her finding her mate. So much time had passed. By now, I was sure he had decided she was gone forever, and he had found a new companion. I consoled myself with the thought that this strong-willed female would make her way back to her world and would also find a new mate. In time, she would raise a family and give the world more beautiful red foxes. Noon had come. The sun was now high overhead. The female fox disappeared into the underbrush. It was time for me to go back home. As I drove away, I felt a little sad, but more than anything, I felt satisfied and grateful that what could have been a tragedy had turned into one of life's little miracles. I took one last look in the rearview mirror, just as I had done the day I had taken the injured fox away. I screeched to a halt. There, just beyond the stand of dark green cedars, stood 2 red foxes. The female with her battle-scarred coat, and standing silently right next to her, the male who had watched her vanish and had decided to wait faithfully for her return. He did not seem to notice her less than perfect fur. He only noticed that she had returned to him. Only moments later, the 2 red foxes disappeared into the Texas brush, back in the world that belongs to them alone, back to their life together, as if humans had never harmed nor helped them, as if they'd never been apart. That concludes the fox story. It was always one of my favorites because it has such a wonderful happy ending. Does anybody have any questions or comments, anything they'd like to say to me or about the story? Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. That's always part of the regimen with an animal who is really severely injured like that, because they're not going to get well if they are racked with pain and they can never calm down enough to start healing.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's always part of it, and it's hard on them. I mean, the downside, of course, is you've got this wild animal who's never had any kind of drugs in them at all, and suddenly you're giving them all these drugs in their system that's not used to drugs.
Mm-hmm.
But we've learned over the many years that there are times when it's just obviously that's necessary, and when the outcome is that the animal's life is saved and that they actually go back to their life in the wild, then I like to think that is worth it, because it does the good that we hope that it would do. Well, thank you, but no, I have to tell you, all my life experiences, my writing experiences, everything happened in wildlife rescue. I came with no skills whatsoever. Well, yeah, so my background was zip. I, I got lucky when I was born. I had really great parents and they taught me and all my siblings that nature was just the most wonderful thing in life, as were animals, and that we should always respect and care for nature and animals. So I grew up in a very raucous household where we were the the Cuny house in the neighborhood. If you found an animal in trouble or a homeless dog or cat, take them to the Cuny. So that's my background, frankly. That is my background. And then when I started Wildlife Rescue, I certainly had no degrees, didn't even go to college, to be perfectly honest. So I just wanted, I wanted so intently to help animals, wild animals, who anytime someone did something with them, it seemed it was doing something to them, not for them, such as, putting them behind bars or using them for so-called education or whatever. So I started the organization with the burning intention to just simply help wild animals stay in the wild or get back to the wild if they were injured or orphaned. And then I had to do a lot of learning as I went along, a great deal of learning as I went along. And a great many people contributed to that, of course, over the many years. And animals, especially wild animals, they are really cooperative in that they let you know when they need help and when to leave them the hell alone. And, it's been lots of trial and error, but it's been also a lot of people helping who knew different things that I didn't know. And, now we're 43, going on 44 years later. So I like to think it was all the right thing to do. I know it was the right thing to do. We were just a neighborhood back in the 50s. I was born in 1951, so it was just your kind of standard San Antonio neighborhood when they used to be like that in the 50s. Lots of vacant lots around at the time. So that's where I was raised. Well, and of course, the question is, how do they survive in the future? I will say that one thing that we've learned at Wildlife Rescue over our many years is that with the native species of wild animals, number one, yes, living in a human-centered world is profoundly difficult for them. Number two, they are equally profoundly adaptable. Possums, raccoons, they're so tenacious, and they just keep hanging on no matter what we do to their habitat. And as we all know, what used to be wonderful green spaces, even big vacant lots, are gone. And so now it's all houses, it's all buildings, asphalt. They manage. I do not know how they manage. I swear I don't. They just are the most incredible beings because they just stick with whatever they've got and see it through. I'm constantly concerned about where one keeps sending animals when we have to release them. And I will tell you that for the releases that we do, for the most part, we do take them out of highly urbanized areas, with some exceptions who, like squirrels and all, who come from a highly urbanized area. We have to remember that they are now an urbanized wild animal. To take them out somewhere, let's say on the other side of Fredericksburg or whatever, and they're not going to necessarily know all the ropes of getting along there. So yes, it's a problem. It is absolutely a problem that the habitat is being destroyed, wiped out systematically by our species. The wild animals who are adapting, the native wild animals, they seem to be doing mostly well. The deer are having a larger problem because they're a bigger animal. They need more room. We've killed off all their predators except for humans. So they're having a tougher time of it. But even they, as we all know, are in neighborhoods. We're starting to see more and more coyotes because habitat's gone. Where are they going to live? But in what is now our neighborhoods, it used to be their land. So it's difficult. It's not good. It's not a good situation for wildlife right now, anywhere on the planet, but certainly not in urban areas. But I do see them doing a lot of adapting and somehow managing. And I don't know how they do it, but they do it. Foxes generally don't see dogs or cats as somebody they want to tangle with. As you know, foxes are not very large. So, they're not going to, and who they eat are going to be much smaller animals than even insects, grasshoppers and all. So, no, but do keep in mind that if you're going to feed wildlife ever, keep it to a very minimal amount. You just want to give them something that is supplemental. You don't want to give them something that they become dependent on, because that's not in their best interest. What we do tell people is during times of drought, when food and water are really, tough to find, then putting water out is probably perfectly fine and helpful. But again, just keep your food to a minimum. It's a hard time for them, but again, they just figure things out. They know how to do what they need to do. As far as their territorial range, I'm not exactly certain what their territorial range is. I know that they will share some range with other foxes, and they probably in somewhere like Canyon Lake, their range is going to be different. I would suspect a little bit more expansive than it would be in the wild, because there's probably more foxes there. There's going to be more raccoons there. There's going to be more possums, and all those species will share space, but they're going to share it in a way that they all know what their space is and where the overlaps are. And it's much easier for the smaller wildlife to share space. It's not going to be quite the same for, say, someone like as large as a cougar, and they will even share space somewhat in the wild. So you probably see raccoons. If you're Canyon Lake area, you probably see raccoons and squirrels and armadillos and possums and skunks and all those animals, and they're all sharing the space with the foxes and vice versa. So the space also is dictated somewhat by where are the food sources? How far do I need to go to stay alive by finding the food I have to have? And then when my babies are born, what do I have to do to keep them alive? Do I need to expand my space a bit to find more food to feed them? All those things dictate just exactly what their range is going to be. We do not ever recommend that people feed wildlife, just, randomly throw everything out there for them. It's going to depend on the setting. It's going to depend on so many factors, but let's, again, in the time of drought, that's a totally different scenario. Animals sometimes need some help. Certainly with water, they need help. Mm-hmm. Wildlife will, because they have to be somewhat opportunistic feeders. They just have to, because it's a matter of, if I eat today, it depends on what I find to eat or who I find to eat if they're carnivore. So if suddenly someone's feeding a bunch of grackles at a restaurant, they're throwing bread out, and the grackles mm-hmm. and the starlings and the sparrows are coming around and grabbing the bread. Number one, the bread's not good for them at all. It's in fact very bad, very harmful. Number two, yes, they do get habituated to that. Just the way a person's going to, drive through a Dairy Queen, window to grab some dinner, if you want to call that stuff food, but it isn't in their best interest. And of course, we do it because we want to see them come up close to us. And that's the problem right there. That is the problem. Generally speaking, if you step back and look at what we do, what our species does with wild animals, we do it because we want something different from them than just leaving them the hell alone and letting them be out there wherever they are doing whatever it is they do, whether we get to see them or don't get to see them. We want something different. We want a close contact. We want them to look at us. We want them to come near us. We want something. We want them as a so-called pet, whatever it may be. We have to be very careful about that, because usually when it's something that a human wants to do to a wild being, it is not in that wild being's best interest. And it is not done usually as a favor to that animal. It's done because we want something from him or her. So again, if an animal's really in trouble, we have people call us, they send us pictures of deer who their ribs are showing. They're having trouble, maybe they've had a broken leg or something, whatever the situation is, and they're having trouble. We will say to them, get some pellets that are a good alfalfa pellet, put some of this out with some water. Help them along. Temporarily help them along. Don't get them habituated to this, but help them along. And that's a very different scenario. If you really want to help them, and you're doing it only temporary, and you're not standing there while they're eating, hoping they'll come a little closer and a little closer to you, which is not good, then those kind of situations are different and a little bit more okay. But we cannot keep doing to wild animals whatever the hell we want to do to them because of what we get out of it. We've got to start thinking, is this in their best interest? And most of the time, what we want isn't in their best interest. And if we look at that and we say, this isn't in their best interest, it's really cool to have him come up and eat out of my hand, but it's not in his best interest because he's going to go up to the neighbor who's got a gun. or a dog. So you're right, they do get habituated to it. And you're right, there are negative consequences. And again, unless the situation calls for it, where an animal simply needs a little bit of temporary help, we say, please don't do it.